Everybody. It's unusual to do James Bond. I do understand that. He's not the most moral and guiding character, and yet fascinating. And the way I see it is the following. If something is a multi-billion-dollar project of 50 years, which has captured the imagination of people across the globe and is heard of probably more than most people on the planet, right? There must be something to it. And what is it? Is it, you can ask in the simple question, is it good or bad for the Jews? I mean, but more thoughtfully, is what does it stand for? What's its ideas and values? And that's what we're going to try and unpack tonight. And I'll show you a few clips along the way. So let me show you, start of all here. Here we go. Everything changed, as I'll explain, when Daniel Craig became the latest James Bond, and I'll explain why. But first things first, Bond is a modern myth. That's what it is. Now, when I say myth, what I mean is a dramatic story that talks about the deep values within inside us. Whether it happened or not is irrelevant with myth. In fact, one great definition of a mythology, a myth is a very accurate description of what didn't happen. Right? History happens once. Mythology keeps happening. So the story of Cain and Abel, did it happen? Well, if it happened once in history, okay, fine, one guy killed another. But maybe when the Torah is written, what it's saying is every time a human being kills someone else, it's Cain killing Abel again. It's the mythology of murder. And we need to read the Torah to understand those deep embedded myths in our society. The best book on this, and I mentioned it last week in Star Wars, is Here with a Thousand Faces, with Joseph Campbell in 49, where he talks about the ideas of myths. And let's look at this one. Look what he says. Throughout the inhabited world, in all times and under every circumstance, the myths of man have flourished. He says man because 1949. There are no women in literature in 1949. There are today, but by man he means women as well. The myths of man have flourished, and they have been the living inspiration of whatever else may have appeared out of the activities of the human body and mind. It would not be too much to say that myth is the secret opening through which the inexhaustible energies of the cosmos pour into human cultural manifestation. This is deep stuff. We'll send you the handout afterwards. Religions, philosophies, art, social forms of primitive and historic man, discoveries of technology and science, the very dreams that blister your sleep boil up from the basic magic ring of myth. The wonder is that the characteristic efficacy to touch and inspire deep creative centers dwells in the smallest nursery fairy tale, as the flavor of the ocean is contained in a droplet. And I would say, and James Bond too. What is the mythology of James Bond that captures our imagination? Why do women want to be with him and men want to be him? What's that about? What's that culture that's made it so interesting? Obviously, it's a spy. He's British. He's debonair, right? He's got greased back hair. What's all that about? So the reason it all changed, I think, in the last two movies is because the director was Sam Mendes. The director of Skyfall and Spectre was Sam Mendes, a very accomplished, an award-winning English stage director. So this man really thinks. And instead of a summer blockbuster just being a popcorn movie with lots of explosions, he wanted it to mean something. He wanted it to have ideas in it. I'm a big fan, probably you might have heard of Alan Parker, the great movie director who recently passed away, who made Bugsy Malone and Fame and Evita and The Commitment. An amazing director. And Alan said in one famous interview, he said, if a director isn't trying to say something in his movies, there's no point in making the movie. And Sam Mendes feels that very clearly. It also turns out that Sam Mendes' mum is Jewish, but that's just an interesting side point. So when Sam Mendes takes over the reins of James Bond and writes a script that involves quoting a national poet, that involves visiting a national art gallery right in the middle of an action movie, you've got to think, what's going on here? So let me just show you a little bit of the opening scene of Skyfall right now, just to get in the mood, because in it, and I've realized now, the best thing with these clips is for me to tell you what they're about first, so you know what to look for. So the opening scene of Skyfall, Bond comes across a murder, and he's chasing a guy who's basically got the secrets of all the agents that doesn't want to get revealed. And Bond's chasing him, and he chains him onto a train. And they fight, and Bond gets shot. Who does he get shot by? Moneypenny, who's the assistant who's trying to help him. And she's trying to shoot one of them and she gets the wrong guy. Now, why is it so important? Because They're both Bond and Moneypenny in their earpieces are listening to Bond's boss, who's called, as you all know, M. Okay, and we'll find out why she's called M soon, right? And she is not watching what's going on, but she can hear what's going on, right? And Moneypenny says to her, I think I can shoot the other guy, but I might hit Bond, right? And M says, take the shot. Now, what does that mean about her relationship with Bond? Okay, so that's what we're going to see here. And Bond gets shot and falls in the water, and that's the opening credits. So the first ever movie of James Bond, where in previous ones he's been put in prison, but this one, it opens with him being killed or nearly killed. That's already a deep idea, and it's all about Bond falling. So let me show you that clip now. It's just 2 minutes, and then we'll get into more depth. Let's see if I can make this work. New share, here we go. Films, make sure sound's on. Excellent. And here we go.
I may have a shot. It's not clean. Repeat, I do not have a clean shot. There's a tunnel ahead. I'm going to lose them. Can you get into a better position? Negative, there's no time. Take the shot. I say take the shot. I can't, I may hit Bond. Take the bloody shot. Agent down.
She says, agent down, and they realize that he's been shot. And notice M said, take the bloody shot. And notice, by the way, Bond has an earpiece what's going on. So he hears his own boss willing to sacrifice him, right, for the chance of getting what she needs to get. So that sets up their relationship. So that's deep stuff, and Bond almost dies. And this movie's really going inside him, as we'll see. And it shows his origins. And we discover halfway through the movie, only halfway through the movie, why it's even called Skyfall. This is deep, thoughtful stuff. What they're doing in a popcorn blockbuster, we'll see. But let me show you, first of all, the origins of James Bond. And if you don't believe me, look this stuff up, because it's, I sent you a video about it as well. Nobody does it better. Written, as you all know, by Ian Fleming, who lived till 1964, is an English author, a journalist. He was a World War II naval officer. Okay, and his first Bond novel was was in Casino Royale in 1952, and the first movie was in 1962. Why did he call him 007? Anybody know? Fascinating theories about that. The three that I've read: number one, the diplomatic German code, right? Secret code was 0070, which they all knew when they tried to break it with the Enigma machine. That's one possibility. Okay, my favorite one though is to do with a place in England called Deal, which is by the coast. And Ian Fleming would often go that's right, Ian Fleming would often go to parties there, which were held by none other than Noel Coward. I hope you've heard of him. Very decadent parties that would go on in the 40s and the 50s. And Noel Coward would invite people from all over to come down to Deal by the coast and go to these really shocking, unusual parties. And so how would Ian Fleming get there? He'd go on a bus from Victoria Station round the back of where he lived. And what was the bus number? 007. And if you look on the internet and to put bus 007, you'll see all these bus drivers. It's still running today with a big grin, standing next to the 007 bus and grinning. There's many theories of where it comes from. Okay, obviously from a Jewish point of view, we know why it's 7. I don't even have to explain to you why it's 7. It's just obvious. Okay, so we'll come back to that anyway. But who is Bond based upon? He's based on a real person, a man called Sidney Riley, who was known as the Ace of Spies. They even made a TV series about him with Sam Neill playing the Ace of Spies. He was a Jewish, Russian-born, this is true, adventurer. I've got the official book on it. It's called Ace of Spies, right? The true story of Sidney Riley. And he was an agent for Scotland Yard. So why was he called Sidney Riley? Because no one's going to think a British agent's got an Irish name. Remember, the British and the Irish had lots of disagreements. So he took on an Irish name. He is alleged to have spied for at least 4 nations. His real name was Shlomo Rosenblum. Can you imagine how different it would have been? Hi, my name is Rosenblum. Shlomo Rosenblum. Okay, and his notoriety during the 1920s was created in part by his friend, the British diplomat, Sir Robert Bruce Lockhart. Lockhart published articles all about how amazing Riley was. And there's a photo of Riley over here. Look at that. He's got the suit, he's got the cigarette, he's got the parted, greased hair. Right, this is where Bond comes from. Okay. Yes, after Riley's death, the London Evening Standard published in 1931 a Master Spy serial and his exploits. That was by Lockhart. Later, Ian Fleming would use Riley as a model for James Bond. Many consider Riley to be the first 20th century super spy. Riley was a master of deception. Most of his life is shrouded in legend. We don't know a lot about him. This book brings a lot to it. But let me just tell you one story, which is, we know this story happened. We don't know for sure Riley was involved. But if I show you the size of it and the Jewish connections, I think it will blow your mind. It takes place in 1904. And what's happening then? The British are realizing the future of energy is not in coal. Remember, Britain rules the waves, the largest naval fleet, a very powerful empire, the British Empire. But coal is not the future, not for fast-moving boats. The future, as you know, is oil. And as a result, British interests, and that's why the British have such a love affair with the Arabs for so long, the British were looking for different places where there's potential oil for a future, and they needed to find that. And what happened, there was a man called, and his name is Darcy, I've got it over here, not the Darcy from the musical, but his name was an Australian called Darcy, who had what's called a valuable concession from the Persian government of oil rights in southern Persia. Now, you understand what a concession right is. It means that the Persians, they were sitting on a lot of oil, but they couldn't afford to find it. So they'd hire a foreigner, a Western, this Australia, he would search for oil, but the concession he would get, if he found it, is he would get a cut that he could make money out of it. So he bought that right, that concession. And it was a very important one because they were going to find oil. They hadn't found oil yet, and the British government wouldn't give them any money. They said, find oil first, and then we'll come back to you. But the problem was, it was getting dangerous because others were interested in it. And Darcy, and this is a true story, I'll read it out to you. This is from the book. It says the following. Yes, we ascertained that Darcy was at the moment in the Riviera, the French Riviera, negotiating for the transfer of his concession to the French Rothschilds. He was on the Rothschild boat and saying to them, look, I need money now, you invest in this concession. But once he sold it to Rothschild, the British wouldn't get a say, and the British didn't want that. So the story is, no one knows why, but 2 days later, Darcy changed his mind and decided not to go with Rothschild and stick with the British. Why? Many people argue he was convinced that Riley Rosenblum, according to the TV show version of it, dressed as a priest, gets onto the boat and manages to convince Darcy, don't do this, the British will fund you better. It's an amazing story if it's true. We definitely know the facts without the Riley part of it. But what's amazing is, what did that lead to? Well, an agreement was signed in 20th of May 1905, and almost 3 years later, oil was struck in Masjid el-Sulamin. In April 1909, the Anglo-Persian Oil Company was founded, today known as BP Amoco. British Petroleum, BP, was a direct result of that. So if this is true, Riley, the spy, the Jewish spy, without him, there wouldn't have been BP oil. So you see these small spies in certain continents doing small things could change the fate and the future of the world. That's who Riley was. There's a lot to read. If you're interested, as I told you, he's called The Ace of Spies, the story of Sidney Riley. He got killed ultimately by the Russians, and there's a photo of him lying dead as well. There you go, Riley's corpse, found in 1925. I can hold it up. There you see him lying dead. So they got him in the end, but a fascinating guy. And that's who Bond is based upon. So it's actually Bond on a simple level. I know it sounds a bit naff, but Bond's Jewish. End of story. He just is. And look it up. This is the historical knowledge we have. So that's also fascinating. But again, with the movies, I'm interested in the way they tell the mythology of Riley. Now in Judaism, what is mythology? We call it Midrash. Midrash, there are many Midrashim, as you know, on the Torah. Did Midrash happen? Did it really take place, all those things? Well, how could it? There's hundreds of Midrashim. They contradict each other. When did Abraham find God? One Midrash says 1, one says 3, one says 13, one says 40, one says 75, one says 52. Which is it? You could tie them all together. But the Midrashim are the glue that hold the Torah together. They're the emotional feelings behind the events and the stories. Like when an actor turns to the director and says, what's my motivation in this scene? And you see it in the face of the actor, but only if you read it in. That's what Midrash is. It dives deep into the meaning. And Midrash, as you can see from here, comes from the word lidrosh, which means to examine or to investigate. And Agadah, which is the Talmudic word for Midrash, means God to tie together and to make connections. So basically, I'm going to do a Midrashic reading of James Bond, if you'll come along for the ride. Here we go. Yes. And also, by the way, the Bond story is the classic reenactment of the most fundamental myth, the conquering of good over evil. That's what happens. Always at the beginning. We have the evil looks like it's going to win, and in the last few seconds when the bomb is defused or the bridge is blown up or the person is killed, I can list all the movies, they are saved. And it reinforces that. The question of the mythology asks, though, is what is the cost to the hero to save the day? And what's not just the physical cost, but the moral, ethical cost. And that's what we're going to analyze a little bit now. So let's continue. Here we go. And look at the way the rabbis looked at Midrash. Look what it says here. This is a Midrash on Sifrei. It says, you want to get to know the one who spoke and created the world. Notice the name of God in the Midrash. It doesn't just say you want to know God. It says you want to know your creator who spoke. What? Lomed Agadah. Read Midrash. Shemitoch kach. Through studying that, ata mekir mi shama ba'olam. You will learn to know the one who spoke and made the world. Mudabek b'darkav, you can cling to God's ways. It's an amazing idea. Why does it say the one who spoke and the world came to be? Because God creates through speech. Speech is reality. And that's what Midrash is. Analyzing text, the way the story is told. We don't necessarily know what actually happened, but it's the truth that's frozen in the narrative that we're chasing here. And Midrash is a very important issue. Look what Maimonides says. The Midrash found in Talmud is not to be regarded as unimportant or insignificant. Much wisdom resides there. For one thing, it includes marvelous riddles and wondrous, delightful tales. More than that, if you ponder them intelligently, you'll find their truths of unsurpassed worth. And I would say, lahavdil, the same with Bond or with good movies. Right? They're fantabulous, wondrous tales, but there is truth there if you learn to uncover it. Or as Heschel said, whoever sees in Agadah mind games or intellectual ornamentation does violence to its essence and squanders its riches. To find the true meaning of Midrash, search deeply into each interpretation. You'll find their struggles, worries, and yearnings, eternal problems, and contemporary questions. So that's what we're going to do with Bond. 007, well, 7 is the number Sheva, which in Hebrew is Sova, which means completeness. You know when you bench, achalta v'savata v'erachta, which means you eat and you bless, you eat and you're satisfied and you bench, right? That's why halachically you're only supposed to bench when you're satisfied. The rabbi said, well, even if you're not satisfied, you should bench. You always bench. But when I first learned this as a kid, I was like, you know, I went to someone's house and they gave me food and I was like, you think I'm going to bench after this? I'm not satisfied. I want more. So, but technically, but I'm just joking. But to understand, but the pasuk says it's actually in this week's Seder in Akev, I think we're coming up to. Yes, achalta v'savata v'erachta, and you shall bless God. So savata means completeness, wholeness. That's why it's 7 days of the week, and 7 is a dramatic stage of completion. So it takes 7 days to get over getting married. So you have Sheva brachas. And it takes 7 days to get over losing someone. So you have a Shiva. So the fact that he's 007 is just lovely, right? There's lots of 7s in Judaism, right? But what about Q? You know, the guy who always gives them help, weapons, right? Is Q Kabbalah? That's too cute. We'll get to what Q stands for in a minute. And what's M? This woman who looks after him. What's all that about? So we'll get to that. But as I told you, the reason why Skyfall, the movie, is so good is because it's got the origin of Bond. We discover where he's from. And it's all in the opening credits, which I'm going to play you now. In the opening credits, remember, Bond has just fallen in the water. We now see him falling and we go inside. And I want you to watch the imagery, and even though it'll jump on your screen, I want you to notice how it keeps going inside him, inside the bullet, inside his eye, deeper and deeper and deeper. The imagery, it's less on the naked woman stuff, which we're used to, and more on the going deeper inside, the inner life of the person. That's what's interesting. And an amazing song by the English singer Adele as well, which is just so Jewish. So I'll give you the words now so you'll listen to it and you'll hear. She begins by saying, this is the end. What a great way to begin a song. Hold your breath and count to 10. He's underwater. Feel the earth move and then hear my heart burst again. For this is the end. I've drowned and dreamt this moment. So overdue, I'm stolen. This is about Bond being overdue to die. And then it says, let the sky fall. When it crumbles, we will stand tall and face it all together. And now look at this next bit. Do you recognize it? She says these words. Wasn't me. Where you go, I go. Where you see, I see. I know I've never been me without the security of your loving arms keeping me from harm. Now in the movie, the idea is that M is meant to protect him, but she doesn't. But when you read this, anybody want to write in the chat, which book of the Bible is this a quote from? Where you go, I go. What you see, I see. Anybody know where that's from? Can I see in the chat? Here we go. Excellent. Book of Ruth. Absolutely. Now, just because I'm a weirdo, when I'm watching the movie, I'm hearing the song, I'm going, that's Sefer Ruth. But it's the same imagery, because in Ruth, it's about her deep relationship with Naomi. And here it's the relationship of Bond and M. And it says, you know, I've never been me without the security of your loving arms. What's the word for security in Hebrew? Bitachon. But bitachon can be pronounced in two ways in Hebrew, right? When Bibi says it, he says, I will give you, if you vote for me, I'll give you bitachon. I will give you security. But when a rabbi says it, it's bitachon b'Hashem. You know what bitachon b'Hashem is? Faith in God. It's the same word. Do you see it as physical security or spiritual security? Or really, it's a bit of both, right? It's about trust. And it's right there, the security of your loving arms keeping me from harm. It's right in the song. It's about that relationship. So let me show you now, I've introduced it to you. Let me show you the opening clip from the movie. Let's see if let me set this up for you, and we'll begin to understand this opening credits. Okay, just setting it up for you now, and then we can do it. Yes, let me swap over, stop share. That's right, and now I'll share the screen on this opening scene. As I told you, Bond, I'll talk occasionally, but I'll try not to. We're going to hear the whole song, but it tells you the whole movie. It shows about him going to visit Macau and all these different images, but I want you to get a feel, an impressionistic feel, right? In a way, the opening credits are kind of midrash on the movie itself, but it's about the inner world of James Bond. Here we go. Big sound?
This is the end. Hold your breath and count to 10.
that is not a coincidence, that opening credit. That is purposeful by Mendes. That the very last bit is this eye. I don't know how much you could see, but it's worth watching the clip. I've sent you the clips. That literally his name is written on Bond's eye. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go right inside. There's one point, it actually goes into a grave. And so we discover, actually, what is Skyfall? I mean, it's interesting. Bond is, it turns out he isn't dead. He tries to come back and be part of MI6 again. And he has an interview to see if he is competent. And they ask him all these questions, right, backwards and forwards, and they say Skyfall. And he just walks out. So like, it's an hour into the movie, and you're like, what is this Skyfall? And then it's not even mentioned once after that, but just when Bond has to run away and hide M from the bad guy, he takes her to Scotland, and he turns into an old country house, and written on the entrance to the country house is the word Skyfall. It turns out that Bond is originally Scottish, and this was his childhood home. So again, the title is your childhood, your origin, your background. That's what it's about. Once there's an origin story, we can do really good midrash. And Adele won an Oscar for this song, not just the music, but the words as well, as I showed you, straight out of the Book of Ruth. Now, what's the movie about? It's all about a triangle of Bond and M and the bad guy. He's played by Javier Bardem. He's a character in the movie called Diego Rodriguez. He's also called Da Silva, right? And he also used to be a 00 agent from M. And actually, he died trying to do the right thing for her. He nearly died doing the right thing for her and got his whole face destroyed. So basically, he hates M for dumping him. But we know that Bond, M also dumped him at the beginning of the movie. So it's all about these two men, brothers, if you will, both 00s, right? And their agent handler, M, who deals with him. So you know what the story is based on? It's very clear. It's Yaakov and Esav. Why do I say that? Well, James Bond. Why did he choose the name James Bond? Right? So we know, actually, because it was a book on Ian Fleming's desk of the most bland name he could find, Mr. Bond. James Bond, a very normal British name, right? So that even though he's got an amazing life, publicly, he's just a very simple name. But Midrash says, it doesn't matter why he did it, I can read into it. James is a Christian version of the name Jacob. That's what it is. So if you look for James, you're looking for Yaakov in the Bible. And what does Yaakov mean? Right? Remember when he steals his brother's birthright and Esav comes in? Vayomer achi kara shemo Yaakov. That's why he's called Yaakov. V'yakveni. That's the verb to Yaakov. He deceived me twice. He took my birthright and now he's taking my blessing. My blessing. He stole from me. In Hebrew, la'akov is to follow or to spy on. And an akav is a detective. Coincidence? Well, it is, because that wasn't the intention of Ian Fleming when he did it. But nevertheless, the one character in the Bible who is named a spy is Jacob, which is James. Fascinating. Okay? And more than and also he fights everybody, just like Bond. Bond fights the British Civil Secret Service as well. He takes on him and fights back. And Jacob fought everybody. In fact, while we called Israel, Jacob's name was changed from Yaakov to Yisrael by an angel. Look at it over here. What's your name? Yaakov. The angel fights Jacob and he says, what's your name? He says, my name's Jacob. Lo Yaakov, your name won't be Jacob anymore. Ki im Yisrael. You're going to be called Yisrael. Ki savitem elokim ve'manashim atochel. Because you fought God and man and you won. That's what Yisrael means. Sarita, we are fighters. We'll take on anybody. Right, which is the characteristic of James Bond, right? But now it gets interesting as well, because we're not going to see this clip later on, but it's yes. Who is Jacob's brother? He's Esau, right? Now, what do we know about Esau when he came out? Before I scroll next, you can find it here. What do we know about Esau when he comes out? What do we notice about his body, which is hard for Jacob to copy? Do you want to write this in the chat? Right? And in fact, when he wants to eat something as well, it's similar as well. It's a color and also something about his skin. Here we go. In this chat, let's how we're doing here. I did notice the earlier chat that was made, by the way, about the opening of this thing. I noticed that. He's ruddy and red-haired. Absolutely. He's a wild man. Absolutely. Now, the bad guys, I told you, he's got a few names in the movie, but his real name turns out to be not Silva. It turns out to be Tiago Rodriguez. That's his real name. Okay, he's called Raul Silva, but his real name in the movie, we discover, is Tiago Rodriguez. Do you know what Rodriguez is, by the way? Spanish for red. Same thing as well. Fascinating as well. Now, and Asab, by the way, is tired. When he comes in for that red pottage, he says, I'm tired, ayef anochi. In the movie, there's a great bit, by the way, where the bad guy, Rodriguez, finally captures Bond, and he's like, I'm so tired of running. Can you just calm down? And he acts in the same way, as like very tired of life. Okay? But here's the most interesting thing. Why is she called M? Right? So in the movie, there's a hint. Because at the end of the movie, because what happens, by the way, is this guy, Rodriguez, the bad guy, is trying to kill M. Right? Who's played by Judi Dench, a famous Oscar-winning English actress, Judi Dench. And Bond, basically, the bad guy, Tiago Rodriguez Silva, is trying to kill her because he hates what he's done to him. Right? And Bond is defending her. And so Bond hides her, and he's trying to chase her and to save her. And the bad guy is saying, you better go. Mummy's calling, mother's calling. And it's clear that M really stands for mother, that she mothers people. It's a very famous thing in England where there's a senior woman, we call her mother. There's a famous scene with Margaret Thatcher and all her cabinet. And it's actually in a scene from the movie The Iron Lady, but it's a true story, that they were all there together. And she goes, shall I be mother? And they all look at her and she goes, I'll pour the tea. And she plays mother to all of them. So the mother is this image of the woman. Why is it interesting? Well, look at this verse. Did you know in the Sedra of Toldot, which is the Sedra in which Jacob and Esau have this fight, over and over again it says Jacob and Esau and their relationship. And this is the verse. It's over here. Look at this. It says that at the end of the story, Isaac sends Jacob away and he goes to Padan Aram to Lavan, the son of Bethuel, the Aramean, the brother of Rebekah, the mother of Jacob and Esau. And this phrase, the mother of Jacob and Esau, it's mentioned like 10 times in the Sedra. And even if you look at Rashi on this verse, look, I've got the Rashi in Hebrew. Rashi, Em Yaakov Esav, Eni Yodem. I don't know why it's here. Rashi says it's been repeated so many times. Why does he keep saying that she's the mother? It's trying to say that even after everything, one guy turns out good, one turns out bad, she's still the mother. But how do you pronounce it in Hebrew? Rivka is M, Yaakov Esav. And M means mother. But M is also M. You follow that? It's amazing. It's there in the Torah. Not Ima, M. M, Yaakov Esav. M, Jacob, who is James Bond, and Asaph, who is Rodriguez. Straight there in the text. Why? Because it's a mythological retelling of Jacob and Esau. Right? They both want their mother's love. Remember? How does Jacob get the coat? Remember, he puts his brother's coat, which is hairy, so it feels like it's that. How do you get the coat? Because according to the Rashi, Asaph didn't leave it with his wives. He didn't trust his wives. He left it with his beloved mother. And then his beloved mother, Rebecca, said to Jacob, go and get that coat and you wear it. Both boys want the affection of their mother. And one turns out good, one turns out bad. Okay, the chat's going a bit crazy. Let me just look at this for a moment. Mother manager, yes, absolutely. But in the early Bond, she wasn't Emma Man, absolutely. But changing M to a woman was the key issue here. Absolutely, of course it was a woman originally. But what Mendes is showing, and since they changed M, is really, it's much more interesting to have it as a female attitude. The handler, the manager, is a female mythologically role that takes place. The fact that it's a man or woman isn't the point. They act as the mother. They mother you. The new one in the Spectre is going to be Mallory. He's going to be the new M. But anyway, now you're beginning to see these connections here. Absolutely fascinating. Okay. Let me show you another bit as well, because I'm just conscious of time. Yes. Okay. It's interesting. There are two water scenes in this movie, Skyfall. One at the beginning where he falls and dies, and one at the end where he's being chased. Again, remember he's trying to save M, and they run after they've blown up the house, which he never liked anyway. They run over a river which has been iced over, and to escape, Bond shoots the water and he goes inside again. Right? And by the way, it's really crazy, Ari, but remember that clip? How does Bond get away from the bad guy who's caking him? He grabs him by the thigh of Jacob. It's amazing, actually, in that scene. He grabs him to get away, and he gets out again. Now, what's interesting is in the Bible, there are two water stories that are fundamental, okay? Jacob in the birth canal, when he's fighting with his brother, and then when he goes over the Yabok River, again, to try and get the pots at the end. Or similarly, the Jewish people. We leave Egypt by crossing the Red Sea. We enter into the land of Israel by crossing the Jordan. In the book of Joshua, a big deal is made of that compares it. So these two water scenes are a symbol of rebirth, of rebuilding, of change. And so Mendes is using that famous mythological imagery of water for rebirth. Bond is reborn at the beginning of the movie and reborn again at the end with M. Okay, and that's why I've got here. By the way, the second name is also good as well, Bond, because what's a bond? A bond is a covenant, right? It's the Brit, right? Which is what we are, which is quite kind of cool, especially for us Brits, because we are British. The covenant of man. It's interesting that it comes with us. Anyway, there's a lot of stuff going to get into that. I don't want to get into all the sexual stuff, but who is the most sexy character in the Bible? So in Nach, it's definitely David. Okay, he's beloved. David means Yedid. It means beloved, lover. But in Torah, it's Jacob. He's got more wives, right? They take turns sleeping with him. They move his bed around. If you read the relation with Rebecca and Rebecca and Isaac, it's very formal. But with Jacob, we hear, by the way, look at the names of the tribes even. The names of the tribes of Israel, what are they based on? He loves me, he might love me, he'll love me now. It's all about the relationship that Leah and Rachel have with Jacob. Our nation of Israel is born out of loving relationships. It's all love, and it's nothing to be embarrassed about. Sex and love and desire is all part of nature, and Jacob has it. And James Bond has it as well. It's a whole other path to go down. We're not going to get into that now, but it's interesting that. Now, the next scene I want to show you. Only in this movie do we actually see a famous painting. This is it. It's called The Fighting Temeri, Tug to Her Last Berth, Broken Up. This is a tugboat. It's a tugboat. He's making this old boat. It's a famous painting by Turner, very famous English painter, and it's in the National Gallery in London. Were you tours there? So now in all the other Bond movies, Bond always goes to meet Q. Remember? And Q is going to give him the guns or the special gadgets he's going to use to save people. Q, by the way, stands for quartermaster. Quartermaster is the person in Old England who you would go to get, if you're doing a deal, to get the things that you need in order to do it. They're in charge of the money at the bursar of the company. So Q really stands for quartermaster. But what's amazing is Bond doesn't know who Q is now. It's a new guy, and he's told, go to the National Gallery, and they sit in the gallery together. I'm going to tell you the scene, and then you're going to watch it. But you've got to. It is so deep. It's 1 minute long. Right, I'm watching this, remember, with a whole popcorn audience, and suddenly we're looking at a famous Turner painting in the National Gallery, and it shows Bond sitting next to a very young man, quietly, right? And Q just says, they're just watching this painting together, two men in a gallery, and Q says, it always makes me feel a bit melancholy. Grand old warship being ignominiously hauled away to scrap. He's not talking about the ship. He's talking about Bond. The inevitability of time, don't you think? What do you see? And what does Bond say? A bloody big ship. They're really talking about him. Are you past it? Or even, is the British Empire past it? This is made in 2012 when the Olympics come to Britain, and we've got Tony Blair and a new resurgence of ideas in Britain. Is Britishness old? Or is there something still meaningful in Britishness? Do you know how they open the Olympics? Did you see that scene? Look on the internet, type in James Bond and the Queen. One time only ever in all of British history did our Queen do something cool, right? It's the opening scene of the Olympics. It shows James Bond walking into Buckingham Palace, and he walked, the real James Bond, right? Daniel Craig walking in, and the Queen's sitting there, and he stands there, and she turns around and says, "Good evening, Mr. Bond." And the whole place goes, great, really? And they walk together, and they go out Buckingham Palace into a helicopter, and they fly over Britain, and the statue of Churchill salutes, and they go above the Olympics, and they both jump out the plane as if the Queen's wearing a parachute. And you see her jumping out the plane. And then the next scene, opening the Olympics on the Royal Box, and she's standing there with the same outfit. Right? The director of that scene, what's his name? Another English famous director, can't remember his name at the moment, made Slumdog Millionaire, convinced the Queen to play James Bond, because, and that, why I'm telling you that scene, what's going on there? Bond is a mythical spy, defender of the realm, mythical. But in the Olympics, in the dramatization of Britishness, we take a myth and we introduce it to the real hero of our country, the Queen, heroine, and they merge, a myth and reality become merged. That's the power of a myth, to inspire you to do things. Even if it's not true, it doesn't matter. Bond stands for these ideas. That's what's in Skyfall. So let me show you this scene now, and it continues, by the way, where Bond and the quartermaster have a little conversation. So let me cue this up for you now. Here we go, quartermaster. Here we go. Right, here they are. And now I'm going to, how do I do this? 1 second, so I've got to set it up each time. Do that, good. And then I do that, that's good. And now I stop share. Thank you, just going through. And let me find, where do I go now? Oh yes, I go share, and this should work. Here we go. Look at that, right? You can't understand how happy I was. Look at this. You've got Q, famous Ben Whishaw actor, he played Paddington, by the way, and Daniel Craig, famous English actor, married to a Jew, obviously, Rachel Weisz, and they're sitting in the National Gallery. Look at the paintings behind them. Now listen to this beautiful, beautiful scene.
Always makes me feel a little melancholy. Grand old warship being ignominiously hauled away for scrap. The inevitability of time, don't you think? What do you see?
A bloody big ship. Excuse me.
007. I'm your new quartermaster.
You must be joking.
Why, because I'm not wearing a lab coat?
Because you still have spots.
My complexion is hardly relevant.
Your competence is.
Age is no guarantee of efficiency.
And youth is no guarantee of innovation.
I'll hazard I can do more damage on my laptop sitting in my pyjamas before my first cup of Earl Grey than you can do in a year in the field.
Oh, so why do you need me?
Every now and then a trigger has to be pulled.
Or not pulled. It's hard to know which in your pyjamas. Q.
007.
Now that is amazing filmmaking, right? Did you see that? They have a moral conversation. It says all you need to do is pull the trigger. That's all. I can do much more damage with my Earl Grey, very British tea, than you can do in a year in the field. He goes, yes. So why do you need me? Just to pull the trigger or not to? That's morality. When do you shoot? When do you not shoot? Just that text is an amazing analysis of what is the role, or what are you willing to do to defend your country. And it also has the idea that Bond is bloated and like an old a ship that's too old to live anymore and needs to be put out in harbour. You see how much he achieves just in 1 minute? That's great filmmaking. There's another great scene at the end of the movie where M is getting in trouble with the government because she sends Bond in and does all these dangerous things, and maybe it's old-fashioned and we don't need these spies anymore. And she gives a speech, right? She gives a speech in front of them, and she quotes from Tennyson. Okay, it's over here, Ulysses, right? This amazing bit. Let me play it to you, and we'll look at the text as well. See if I can find this for you now as well. And oh, by the way, what's going on is she's reading the speech while the bad guy is trying to run in, and he's about to come in and attack her while Bond's chasing him. So while she's describing her feelings about why we need spies and we need to stand strong, you see the embodiment of that Bond chasing the bad guy. This is Jacob and Esau chasing after M, their mother. So let me show you this scene over here now. Yes, M recites Tennyson. There we go. Let me set this up for you. Yes. New share. This is it. Okay. Watch the scene.
Chairman, Ministers, today I've repeatedly heard how irrelevant my department has become. Why do we need agents? The 00 section, isn't it all rather quaint? Well, I suppose I see a different world than you do. And the truth is that what I see frightens me. I'm frightened because our enemies are no longer known to us. They do not exist on a map. They're not nations. They're individuals. But look around you. Who do you fear? Can you see a face, a uniform, a flag? No. Our world is not more transparent now. It's more opaque. It's in the shadows. That's where we must do battle. So before you declare us irrelevant, ask yourselves, how safe do you feel? Just one more thing to say. My late husband was a great lover of poetry, and I suppose some of it sunk in, despite my best intentions. And here today I remember this, I think, from Tennyson. We are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven. That which we are, one equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield.
Now, again, an incredible scene, because again, she's reading poetry in the middle of an action movie, right? But look what she says. The issue again is it quaint, the need to defend ourselves? And we as Jews, by the way, with our state of Israel and the need for our defense, and the fact that our secret service, the Mossad, is one of the greatest in the world, is interesting as well. So look at this. Look what she says. This is the end of Tennyson's Ulysses, when Ulysses is coming home after his great battles. By the way, someone said along the way, isn't it more Oedipal than what I'm saying? Howard's asking that point. Absolutely. But Oedipal is the Greek version of Yaakov and Esav. For them, it's a tragedy. For us, it's not necessarily. They're coming from the deep well of myth that Campbell talked about. Absolutely. Oedipus and Jacob and Esau is analyzing the same root issues of relationships with the mother and independence and becoming yourself. Absolutely. And by the way, the death scene at the very end of the movie, M dies, sorry guys, but M dies at the end of Skyfall, right? And Bond is holding her in her arms, in his arms, right? The mother and the son, but becoming independent. And you know what the last thing she says? She looks up and she goes, at least I did one thing right, referring to Bond as her son, right? In Judaism, we're not embarrassed of that, right? The mother is proud of the son and the son becomes independent. But look at the speech of what she says, because you know what? This isn't just about the Secret Service. It's not just about Bond. It's not just about Britain. For me, it's about the Jewish people today, in 2020, when our synagogues are all closed and we can't do Kiddush, and we can't do singing, and we can't do what we do. Is Judaism going to survive? Yes, it'll be damaged, it will survive. Why? Because we're old, like that tugboat, but we're not gone. And this is the phrase for me that summarizes our Judaism today. We are not that strength which in old days moved heaven and earth, Shamayim va'aretz. But that which we are, one equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by thousands of years and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. It's Greek description of Ulysses by Tennyson, but it's a brilliant description of Judaism 2020. Okay, and that's why not dying becomes the theme of the movie. Every movie, look, life and death, you only live twice, live and let die. License to kill, die another day. Bond at one point, by the way, in this movie, walks past his mother, buried, look, a mother and father, in memory of Andrew Bond and Monica Delacroix Bond. There's a tombstone, which is all in the opening scene. But you know what's written on it? What do we write on a Jewish tombstone? Anybody know? We always have the same 5 letters over here, right? We always write these letters, Taf, Nun, Sadik, Bet, Hey. Do you know what they stand for? Tiyeh Nishmato, Tzura B'Tzur Chayim. May their soul be bound in the bond, pause for effect, of life. Okay? Every tombstone has Bond on it, that bond that even in death we're not lost. Okay? The phrase is B'Tzur Chayim, which Abigail says. You know what's really interesting? What's the, you'll like this now, we're going to, a couple more minutes, we're going over. What's the logo for Mossad? What I'm telling you here is really cool. It's really about the origins of James Bond and the connection. What's the Jewish version? So I looked it up. This is the logo of the Mossad, right? It's got a menorah in it with 7 candelabras, which is quite nice. So what does it say? It's got a pasuk. Only in Israel does a emblem of a spy agency have a pasuk for Mishle on it. right? So it says, it's Mossad, by the way, stands for Hamasod L'Moadon Ola Tafkidim Meyuchadim, right? Which means, obviously, Institute for Intelligence and Special Operations. But the Pasuk, Va'in Tachbolet Yipol Am, Toshir B'Rov Ya'utz, right? Which means, without strategies, the nation will Yipol, will fall. This is the skyfall. But in salvation is counsel. Right? If you don't have strategies, you'll fall apart. But there's salvation in good counsel. That's the secret of how you decide when to shoot and not to shoot. That was set up in 1949. Just look in the chat over here. Thank you, Leonore. She says, I think this rabbi could look at a train schedule and turn it into a midrash. Thank you so much for that. My daughter says something similar, but it's not. It's actually a view of the world, which is that, you know, there's a lot of very poor movies, Leonore, which have just very simplistic ideas, but other books and novels have more depth to them. But just think, you know, when Sam Mendes, every second of a movie costs thousands of pounds to make. How you set the camera, where everybody stands, what you are doing with them. This is all important stuff. And other people just do it to make action. Mendes does it to make a point, right? So you might, it's a compliment. Oh, thank you very much. Okay, but what I'm trying to say here is that the deep ideas are enrolled in this. Now we're running out of time. I'll just we'll do a little bit of, I won't be able to show any movies for it, but we'll do a little bit of Spectre. But let me tell you, by the way, though, my friend Nathan Abrams, who's a professor of film studies in Bangor University, we taught this together for the first time in Limud about 15 years ago. And we were going to do this session about James Bond and Judaism. So you might have been to a Limud conference. They're really informal things. But the night before we went there, I emailed Nathan and I said, have you got tuxedo? And he goes, yes. So I said, bring it. So there was a room of like 250 people. And we walked in. It was raining outside. We had our overcoats on. And we took them off. And we were both dressed like James Bond in tuxedos, although he had a really big Jufro. So we got a standing ovation before the class even started. But I just said, you know, all Jewish educators should wear tuxedos. You know, why should Hollywood stars wear tuxedos for Oscar shows? Why should we wear tuxedos when we teach Torah? We value it as well. Anyway, that's just a side issue. So they made Skyfall, right? Which, by the way, set 7 letters for that name. Skyfall was 7 letters, right? Again with the 7s, right? And then they did a sequel. And what's it called? Spectre, also 7 letters. And here we go. Right? Special Executive for Counterintelligence, Revenge and Extortion. That's what it's called. Right? And what they do in the movie Spectre, and I've only got 5 minutes for this, there's a lot more to do, we could do another time, is Mendes unifies all the bad guys from the last 4 movies, ever since Daniel Craig came in, because Craig thought it was going to be his last movie. It isn't now. Right? And Spectre, you know what the image of Spectre is? It's an octopus with tentacles. But look at the octopus. What do you notice is unusual about it? Octopi have 8 legs. This one has 7. And this picture is a clip from the movie. Right? What does it look like to you? What does it look like to you? It's an upside down menorah. It's the same symbolism. It's unbelievable. Okay? So we have that. And these are all the bad guys. Le Chiffre, who was in, I'm being really, Le Chiffre, who was in Casino Royale, Dominic Green, Patrice. These are all the bad guys, right? What I call the anti-Ushpizin, right? Why is that? Well, okay, I'll tell you a simple idea and I'll explain it to you. The festival of Sukkot is about what, right? You'd think it's all about life, right? We sit in a sukkah full of life. We say, Hallel, Lo HaMeitim, Hallelujah. We will shake a lot of an etrog. That's all about life. But that's true. One part of it is about life, but it's also about death. Why do I say that? Because it's the Chag HaAsif. It's the festival of ingathering. And every time someone dies in the Torah, it says, Va'asaf el Amav. Abraham was gathered to his people. Va'asaf el Amav. And Moshe died, Va'asaf el Amav, 7 or 8 times. Also, what book do we read on Sukkot? Right? We read Kohelet, which is all about the day of death is better than the day of life. So really, Sukkot's about our mortality. And what do we do on Sukkot, by the way? We sit in our sukkah and we decorate it with the Ushpizin, who are our great heroes who are dead, and we revive them. We bring them back to life to enter into our sukkah. We bring up dead people. Do you know what's based on Sukkot in the ancient world? Halloween. All Hallows Day, the end of one year, the beginning of the next year, where the souls of the dead come to life. Or literally, the Day of the Dead, which is what the opening of Spectre movie is. Right? They do a whole long scene of the Day of the Dead, which is Halloween, which is Sukkot, which is the festival of Seven as well. It's amazing the similarities of these. There's a lot to talk about here. But just like there's a bad Seven, there's a good Seven. And by the way, look, here's the ring. The opening scene is all about getting a ring to show the spectres. Look, they all have this ring, and it's the same symbol of the octopus, of the tentacles of evil. Whereas what happens at the end of the movie, by the way, if you've seen it, is Bond ends up walking through a scene and he sees photos of all the people that have died of his friends. And there's 7 of them as well. Madeleine Swan, Moneypenny, M. Bond, Q, Bill Tanner, Felix Leiter, there's 7 of them. The imagery is amazing in this movie, okay? But let me just tell you one more part of it at the end, okay? Which really summarizes it, which goes, basically, it's about Jacob and Esau all over again, where this time Blofeld becomes the Asaph, same character. But let me just tell you what happens at the end of the movie. Bond finally gets the bad guy, okay? It's on a bridge, he's down his helicopter, Bond's leaving over him, and the bad guy, Blofeld, looks up and goes, finish it, right? You know, finish it. And Bond looks at him, and then he looks up at the woman, Madeleine Swan, this woman, and he goes, I won't, I've got something better to do. And he walks away from the bad guy. Well, Bond is, and in the theory, away from being a spy. But basically, Blofeld is saying it's all about fighting. We're going to fight our entire lives, you and me. And Bond goes, I don't want to. I want to live a life. I beat you. I've conquered you. That's what I needed to do. But I don't want to be this forever and just kill you. I want to live. You know what? That's amazing. What's the last scene of Jacob and Esau? Remember that? Jacob comes back to meet Esau. Esau's got 400 men, and Jacob's afraid, so he sends a present to schmooze him. And Esau turns to him and he says, join me, Jacob, join me, and you and I can save the world. We can do amazing things, right? But Jacob doesn't trust him. So you know what he says? Jacob says the following. He goes, you go ahead. I'll go slowly with the pace of work and family, and I'll catch up with you. And the rabbis say that at that point, Jacob gave up Olam Hazeh. He gave up this world to Esau and to other people. Others will be more powerful in the world, and they'll have their time in the sun. And the Jews will just go very slowly, looking after their families, eventually making it to heaven and to the world to come. And that, I couldn't, you know, I'd watched the first movie, right? And I couldn't believe, are they going to do a sequel like this? Okay. By the way, also it turns out Madeleine Swan, who he marries, who Bond falls in love with, who's her father? It turns out that her father in the movie is Mr. White from an earlier scene. And I'm sitting in the movie going, can't be. Why? Because who did Jacob marry? Right? Right, Leah and stuff. And who's their father? Lavan, which means white. Mr. White. Again, I'm laughing because this is, you know, I'd made the Jacob and Esau connection before Spectre came out. I made this share after Skyfall. Right? And everyone knows that Jacob's father-in-law is called Mr. White. But in the movie, in Spectre, he falls in love with a woman, this Madeleine Swan, who turns up out of nowhere. Turns out she's the daughter of Mr. White of Lavan. So you can't make this stuff up. It's all coincidence, right? But it fits beautifully. Okay? So that's the last scene over here. Okay? So that's the kind of things I want to show. Spectre also being a 7. So again, the point about Sukkot, I don't want to get into too much, by the way, is the idea of rebirth and life, which is very much what the Spectre is all about. In fact, after the opening credits, and you know, Bond walks on and shoots a bad guy, and the blood all comes on the screen, then the screen goes blank, and you get these 4 words: the dead are alive, and it's all about rebirth, right? Which is what the movie is really about. So these are fundamental themes. And what I'd argue is that the Jewish people today, we are called Jews, Yehudim, from Judah, but our true name of our country and our people is Israelites, Yisrael. And that was Jacob, because Jacob never gave up the fight. He got diminished. The angel hit him on the leg. He hobbled away, but Jacob survived, right? Jacob never gave up. And Jacob is the symbol of the Jewish people. We know. We're called Bnei Yisrael. We're also called Beit Yaakov, right? Jacob and Yisrael. Those are our names. We are the children of Jacob. That's who we are. And we've fought forever and anywhere we could to survive. And James Bond is a symbol for that. We are James Bond in terms of making families, in terms of keeping going, of surviving. So it's not a coincidence the Israeli army and the Mossad are some of the best in the world. These things flow out of this because we've had to survive against all odds. We've had to do it with our hand tied behind our back in unfair circumstances. And that's what survival's all about. And that, in a way, is what James Bond has been all about. And those there are connections. So you might be shaken, but hopefully you're not too stirred. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just
I will share the handout afterwards.
okay. So just a few quick notes. One is, I was telling my wife about how you taught Star Wars and tied it into Jewish text, and now you're doing James Bond. Then we're going to Transparent, which I'm interested in, and of course Stranger Things I'm most interested in. I would assume, given the demographics, I'm one of the few people online that have seen Stranger Things. So if you haven't watched Stranger Things, you now just have a few weeks to do it. I would not recommend doing it on a stormy night all by yourself in the basement of your house, but gather someone who lives with you next to you, or watch it with a friend online. Anyway, so my question to you is, do you teach this way to adults only? Do you teach teenagers this way? And what's your response, particularly when you teach Torah this way to a younger group? Do you see that do you do that? And if you do, what's their reaction?
So I take this stuff seriously. I'm not just trying to make cute connections between the two.
Right.
For me, it's about midrash and myth.
Right.
And therefore, I expect to see it in modern cinema. That's what you expect to see. You know, someone's asked me, what about Amalek? Amalek is more about Batman and the Joker. It's another story. But for me, all stories are part of this ring of myth. You just have to see how they fit together and what examples they're doing. By the way, look it up. People have done PhDs on Skyfall. I found one a few years later, and they bring up the Jacob and Esau. They noticed it as well, right? That doesn't make me upset that someone else noticed it. That means that maybe I'm onto the right track here. Right? These are deep themes that these characters are talking about. So I teach children and adults, but I do it very seriously. I do it because I'm trying to explain what mythology is, what the Torah is. The Torah is a great source of mythology, as deep as anything Greek, as deep as any movies. I've got a whole one on Marvel and superheroes as well. Right? That's what I'm trying to show here. So I do teach them, but I do it seriously. If I think people are going to be childish about it, then I don't teach them. You know, I'm doing it because about deep ideas. I can be playful as well, but this is deep stuff for me.
But I guess my question is, I think it is very deep, and I think your teaching method is amazing, and it keeps attention. My question is, when you teach the teenagers this way, do you find that they are very much bought in, and do they have follow-up questions? And does this kind of rile them up to do more Jewish studies from your perspective? What have you seen?
What it riles them to do is to do midrash themselves. I say to do midrash well, you have to know the stories. If you don't know mythology, it's like if you read Plato, you can't understand what he's talking about if you don't know the stories he's basing it on. So the Torah gives us a common narrative that allows us to play with mythology. So I tell the children, if you want to do this well, guys, you've got to know the Seder of the week. You've got to read the Torah, and then you can apply it to all the movies and the cinema that you're watching. If you don't know it, then it's very simplistic. And that's why when people analyze Star Wars who don't know Torah deeply or these ideas, they end up with superficial connections, right? The Torah is always deeper than us. But if we're very simplistic, then we only see simplistic ideas. So I tell them to go back and learn Torah better so you can understand movies better, and email me with your ideas, right? But I always say, think better, think more deeply.
You have some questions online asking if you've done this with Star Trek. I know you did it with Marvel Universe, because I saw that was one topic you spoke about, and maybe we'll bring you back.
Star Trek's complicated because it's a unified thing, and it's kind of, I like what they did in the latest movies, but the original idea of it was kind of very utopian, of all these nations all living together. It's kind of all fantastical, but it's more of an explorer movie, but I haven't really done it. There's nothing, because I don't try and do it, it has to jump out at me. Do you know what I mean? So right. Marvel, the last Marvel movie was amazing at what it was about. Right, should I tell you what it's about in one word?
Sure.
And I'm not sure you'll all know what it is even. You can look it up. It's about Molech. Molech is child sacrifice. What are you willing to do? Okay, there's an amazing scene where Thanos meets his daughter, and he says, and when he destroys the whole world, right? And there's a whole mythical scene in it. It all goes quiet, and you just see a little girl and a father, and he goes. She says to him, "Did you do it?" And he says, "Yeah, I did it." And she said, "What did it cost you?" And he said, "Everything." It's all about, are you willing to kill your child to save the world? Which brings us back to Abraham and the Akedah. And it's what the whole theme is about. It's an amazing movie. I couldn't believe it. I wasn't trying to. It was just staring at me. It's fascinating stuff. So, but it has to speak to me, Ali. So I love the Star Trek movies. They're very clever. I love the fact that we found the origin of the name Bones, which is brilliant. But it hasn't jumped out at me what it stands for. But Stranger Things did amazingly. The Upside Down is clearly Kabbalistic, the Upside Down, and that's what we're going to talk about. And Transparent is just wild. So I got to, but again, I've got different things, but it's got to speak to me. I can't make it happen. You've got to watch it. It's got to come out.
Okay. Well, I did recommend my daughters recommended, who are 18 and 22, said I should watch The Last Airbender. And
Yes, yes.
just so you know, the Last Airbender has to come and save
It's the
the world.
cartoon
It's the
version, but not the
Mashiach.
film.
It's the Mashiach, but it's also Moshe. And
Yeah.
they have to have certain powers over, and it's about earth and air and fire, and it is very, very linked to our tradition. So maybe one day we'll get there.
It sounds similar to The Fifth Element, which also does Mashiach. That's a woman with 4 elements. So a lot of these movies. Let me quote you Cecil B. DeMille. He said there were only really 7 stories in Hollywood, and they're all in the Bible. Okay, that's Cecil B. DeMille. There's only 7 real pattern stories. And there's a book you can buy, The 7 Stories of Hollywood, or the 7 Modes of Story, these different pathways. And the path of the hero, which is what Campbell's book is about, is what the most superhero movies and action movies are really about. Okay, but again, this makes me watch movies. This makes me want to read my Torah and go deeper inside the eye, inside the life. Just go deeper and deeper. And I'll tell you one thing, everybody. I really believe this. Jewish learning is all about reading slowly. And if I can quote Ruth Calderon, the member of the Knesset, she says, and only a woman would say this, again, I hope it's not sexist to say, she goes, the Jewish people are marinated in their texts. A wonderful image that a man would never say. And after living 2 years in Israel and doing proper marinating for my barbecue, I know what she means. You know when you marinate, it just sits in the liquid and it seeps into the meat and it gives a whole new flavor. So to do Jewish learning, you need to marinate in the texts. You need to read the verse in English and in Hebrew twice, and just sit there and let the ideas go into you deeper. What does it remind you of? What is the connection? What do these words mean? And we read it over and over again to get deeper and deeper and deeper. And then the Torah speaks to us. And I believe the word of God comes out to us, but only if we give it that space and that time. And then every story that you see, every action movie, every novel becomes overlapped in this big world of myth, as Campbell said at the beginning. That's what I feel.
Excellent. So CSP next year, I guess, for high-level donors, we'll give like kosher marinade people to enjoy. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Rabbi Zarum, for a terrific read of James Bond and making it so relevant to us. Shabbos is coming. The Torah portion, if it is Akev, I assume it is. Read it. Look for the blessing in there for where we learn about our obligation to say the Birkat HaMazon. It is in there. And have a great rest of your Thursday. Be safe. Next week, we're back. Transparent. If you haven't watched it, watch it. Watch some episodes.
The clips. We'll set out the clips.
Okay. Well, I'll resend the clips. Okay, everybody. Take care. And thank you. Thank you for spending time. Thank you for joining and marinating with us. Sippy, I see you.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Good night. Good night.
Good night.
Good afternoon. Bye, guys.
Yeah.
Good to see you. Bye, everybody. Oh, Phyllis Gilmore is back. Okay. Peter Mesnick was on this one? And I didn't know? Okay. Okay, Peter, glad you can see better, hopefully. David Phillips, good to see you. Jay Kramer, good to see you too. Lana Elber. Okay. Where are you from? You have to text me where you're from. Okay. Bye, everybody. I got to get back to work. Have a good one.